On September 3rd in 1777, the American flag is flown in battle for the first time during a Revolutionary War skirmish at Cooch's Bridge, Delaware. Patriot General William Maxwell ordered the Stars and Stripes banner raised as a detachment of his infantry and cavalry met an advance guard of British and Hessian troops. The rebels were defeated and forced to retreat to General George Washington's main force near Brandywine Creek in Pennsylvania. 3 months before, on June 14th, the Continental Congress adopted a resolution stating that the flag of the United States be 13 alternate stripes, red and white, and that the Union be 13 stars, white in a blue field, representing a new constellation. The national flag, which became known as the Stars and Stripes, was based on the Grand Union flag, a banner carried by the Continental Army in 1776 that also consisted of 13 red and white stripes. According to legend, Philadelphia seamstress Betsy Ross designed the new Kenton for the Stars and Stripes, which consisted of a circle of 13 stars and a blue background at the request of General George Washington. Historians have been unable to conclusively prove or disprove this legend. With the entrance of new states into the United States after independence, new stripes and stars were added to represent new additions to the Union. In 1818, however, Congress enacted a law stipulating that the 13 original stripes be restored and that only stars be added to represent the new states. Smart. On June 14th in 1877, the first Flag Day observance was held on the 100th anniversary of the adoption of the Stars and Stripes. As instructed by Congress, the U.S. flag was flown from all public buildings across our country. In the years after the first Flag Day, several states continued to observe the anniversary, and in 1949, Congress officially designated June 14th as Flag Day, a national day of observance. In 1783, on September 3rd, the Treaty of Paris is signed. The American Revolution officially comes to an end when representatives of the United States, Great Britain, Spain, and France signed the Treaty of Paris on September 3rd in 1783. The signing signified America's status as a free nation, as Britain formally recognized the independence of its 13 former American colonies, and the boundaries of the new republic were agreed upon. Florida north to the Great Lakes, and the Atlantic coast west to the Mississippi River. The events leading up to the treaty stretched back to April 1775 on a common green in Lexington, Massachusetts, when American colonists answered King George III's refusal to grant them political and economic reform with armed revolution. On July 4th in 1776, more than a year after the first volleys of the war were fired, the Second Continental Congress officially adopted the Declaration of Independence. 5 difficult years later, in October of 1781, British General Charles Lord Cornwallis surrendered to American and French forces at Yorktown, Virginia, bringing to an end the last major battle of the Revolution. In September of 1782, Benjamin Franklin, along with John Adams and John Jay, began official peace negotiations with the British. The Continental Congress had originally named a 5-person committee, including Franklin, Adams, and Jay, along with Thomas Jefferson and Henry Laurens, to handle the talks. However, both Jefferson and Laurens missed the sessions. Jefferson had travel delays, and Laurens had been captured by the British and was being held in the Tower of London. The U.S. delegation, which was distrustful of the French, opted to negotiate separately with the British. During the negotiations, Franklin demanded that Britain hand over Canada to the U.S. This did not come to pass, but we did gain enough new territory south of the Canadian border to double its size. The United States also successfully negotiated for important fishing rights in Canadian waters and agreed, among other things, not to prevent British creditors from attempting to recover debts owed to them. 2 months later, the key details had been hammered out, and on November 30th in 1782, the United States and Britain signed the preliminary articles of the treaty. France signed its own preliminary peace agreement with Britain on January 20th in 1783. And then in September of that year, the final treaty was signed by all three nations and Spain. The Treaty of Paris was ratified by the Continental Congress on January 14th in 1784. On September 3rd in 1919, our 28th president, Woodrow Wilson, embarks on a tour across the U.S. to promote American membership in the League of Nations, an international body that he hoped would help to solve international conflicts and prevent another bloody world war like the one from which the country had just emerged. It's recorded that the tour took an enormous toll on Wilson's health. The First World War, which had begun in 1914, grimly illustrated to Wilson the unavoidable relationship between international stability and American national security. In January of 1919, at the Paris Peace Conference that ended World War I, Wilson urged leaders from France, Great Britain, and Italy to come together with leaders of other nations to draft a covenant of League of Nations. Wilson hoped such an organization would help countries to mediate conflicts before they caused war. Having successfully broached the plan with European leaders, Wilson returned home to try to sell the idea to Congress. The plan for a League of Nations met with stiff opposition from the Republican majority in Congress. Worry of the international covenant's vague language and legal loopholes regarding American sovereignty, Congress refused to adopt the agreement and did not ratify the Treaty of Versailles. Still, Wilson was undeterred. At a stalemate with Congress, Wilson embarked on an arduous tour across the country to sell the idea of a League of Nations directly to the American people. He argued, and I must agree with him on this point, that isolationism did not work in a world in which violent revolutions and nationalist fervor spilled over national borders. He stressed that the League of Nations embodied American values of self-government and the desire to settle conflicts peacefully, and shared his vision of a future in which the international community could preempt another conflict as devastating as the First World War. The tour's intense schedule, 8,000 miles in 22 days, cost Wilson his health. During the tour, he suffered constant headaches and in late September collapsed from exhaustion in Pueblo, Colorado. He managed to return to Washington, but suffered a near-fatal stroke on October 2nd. He recovered and continued to advocate passage of the covenant, but the stroke and Republican Warren Harding's election to the presidency in 1921 effectively ended his campaign. The League of Nations was eventually created, but without the participation of our country. America would not join a multinational league until after an even larger and more destructive world war forced the league to be reinvented as the United Nations. All historic information divulged and documented on this audio file can be verified on History.com.